Welcome to the TikTok podcast. The clock is always ticking, so let's synchronize our watches and dive in. I'm your host, Callie Brigham, and I'm here to help you make time for what matters. Hey friends, welcome back to the TikTok podcast. Oh, do we love our bonus episodes or do we love them? Okay, I want to set the stage about today's topic. It's going to be a good one. Ladies, pull up some chairs here. Okay. A few weeks ago, I was messaging my friend Dawn. Many of you know Dawn Barton, the Dawn Barton, and I was messaging her because I had just decided that I was going to get some blood work done, like just a blood panel, all the things, see what's going on inside. So I'm getting the results back and I start messaging her and we start talking about testosterone levels and B12 and this and that. And all of a sudden I just stopped and I said, Dawn, what has happened to us? Are we old? Are we old? What? This is what old people talk about. This is what women talk about with their besties. And then they're like, now what do I do? What do I do? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk like best friends would, maybe getting some blood work done because that's the season that we're in. And so I don't know if anybody out there is like these hot flashes, these mood swings, these emotions, this weight gain. Well, guess what? This is going to be our real deal convo today. So obviously I needed to pull in an expert. I'm so excited for everyone to meet my new friend, Katie. And I want to tell you a little bit about Katie Brula. Are you ready? She's a busy mom of 3. All right. So we already know she's got stuff going on. Here's where she gets the invite to the show. She is a board certified family nurse practitioner. She's been a nurse for 21 years and a nurse practitioner for 13. What I loved about meeting Katie was her passion for lifestyle medicine, preventative care, that sings my song, and integrative health and wellness. And she started that about 8 years ago as she started on her wellness journey. She noticed some huge gaps in our care system here in the US that focuses more on disease management instead of wellness and prevention. And it inspired her to start her own independent practice that focuses less on putting band-aids on problems and more getting to the root cause. She has developed a passion for women's healthcare on this journey with a strong desire to create a space for women to be seen, heard, and valued. She gets the golden ticket as our expert today on time management, emotional management, energy management, physical management. Katie Brula, welcome to the show.
Gosh, thank you so much. So glad to be here. This is maybe one of my favorite things to talk about.
Well, I'm so glad too, because I think the reality is it's an important thing to talk about. And sometimes we don't talk about it, or we don't know who to talk to about it, or what to ask, or like, what's wrong with me? Or I was doing just fine in life, living my life, eating the way I did, sleeping the way I did. And now all of a sudden, like, am I a hot mess? What is going on, Katie?
Isn't that the truth, right?
Okay, so you're gonna spill the beans, spill the tea, whatever the kids say nowadays. I'm feeling real old right now. It's fine. But you're gonna
Gotta
do
keep
that
up.
for us. Yeah, it's hard to keep up. I do have a teenager, so I'm like, all right, we're talking about this topic. I feel like teenagers also have the mood swings and the emotions, and like, does it ever go away? Okay,
It
so
does. Well,
it changes, right? It goes away and then it comes
yeah.
back? Okay. So,
Yep.
Katie, we're gonna talk through all this stuff, but first, would you just tell everybody a little bit about you, a little bit about your background? I know I highlighted some of your professional accolades, but tell us where you're coming from so we know we've got a buddy in this whole thing.
Sure. So, like you said in the introduction, I have been in healthcare for 21 years. And then I started my journey as a nurse practitioner 13 years ago. Um, it's interesting that we're having this conversation this week because it dawned on me this morning. Sometimes I forget like where I started. Sometimes you start on a journey or a path, and you're like, well, you get in your groove. We'll just say that, and you kind of forget where you've been. But I actually started my journey it was the day after Mother's Day 8 years ago when we just had Mother's Day. And so it's kind of my 8-year anniversary. And my youngest was 2. My older 2 were 4 and 5. And I had made a decision that I was done being tired. I was done not loving who I was. I was done not being able to keep up with them, and really kind of done putting myself last on the list. After going to school and having 3 babies very close together, I had really lost who I was, and I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew that I wanted something different. And so that was really my day one, was 8 years ago, right after Mother's Day today. It was kind of a way to celebrate me. What I didn't know, when I started on this path of really trying to find time and prioritize the things that I needed to feel better, was really the ripple that it would create around me, right? Like, I think sometimes we go on these journeys and we start to make these changes and we think it's just about us feeling better, or what have you. And what we don't realize is the impact that it has in everybody around us, whether that's your relationships, your kids, your community, in your professional life, because that really is part of how I ended up here. So anyway, so that's kind of how I started. It was really baby steps in taking care of me. I got to a place, fast forward, I felt pretty good about where I was as far as my wellness journey goes. And it was right before the pandemic started. And I had already been introduced to lifestyle medicine a little before that. I didn't know a lot about it, but I knew, that it was essentially what I was doing. The pandemic hit, and I was supposed to go on a conference. And if you're in healthcare, you know that we hit dollars to spend on continuing education, because it's part of our license, obviously. And so I couldn't go to my conference. And so I had to make a decision on how I was going to spend my dollars for the year, and figure out what I wanted to do. And I circled back to lifestyle medicine and realized that I could spend my time and energy getting a certification that already aligns with what I'm doing. So it really was more about having some sort of, I don't know. I don't even want to call it education, because I already had the education, but it felt like a no-brainer to me at that point. So that was how I started to pursue lifestyle medicine, which feels simple. And I think that when you have the conversations with people and you talk about, what lifestyle medicine is, really it's, behavior change, right? And so it's movement, it's eating as many plants, right? As plant forward of a diet as you can. It's stress management, it's sleep, and it's limiting risky behaviors. So when we talk about risky behaviors, that's alcohol, drugs, smoking, things like that. And I tell my patients this all the time, this feels like simple, right? It feels like going back to basics, and it is, but it is so hard because the system that we live in doesn't really allow us to make any of these changes easy. And so I proceeded to get my lifestyle medicine certification, and this just felt like the best of both worlds, really. I mean, it was already stuff I was doing. It felt like it was a great way to mesh into my professional life. And in the meantime, in the midst of the pandemic, it also gave me some time when things got quiet to really kind of imagine what I wanted my care to look like. And that was where I started dreaming up my practice. And that was how empowered mind and body is the name of my practice. That is really how we came to be. Was this kind of decision that I had made to pursue lifestyle medicine, putting, lifestyle behavior changes, preventative holistic care, and integrative care first, in a system, or a failing system. We'll just say it's a failing system. That is really more about putting band-aids on and taking care of sickness, rather than putting the health and the prevention piece first. So that's really how I got there. I mean, it has really evolved over the last couple of years, especially with my own personal journey in perimenopause. And if you know, you know. And I think that sometimes it's not so obvious up front, that this is what we're going through, like some of these changes in the stuff that is happening in our bodies. And it wasn't for me. I thought there was a lot of other things happening. But because of my own journey, I have really become passionate about the women's health piece, the perimenopause and the menopausal piece, really kind of hormone balance as a whole, because I can recognize and see now this space that women are in, that they aren't seen, they aren't valued, they aren't heard, they're being dismissed, they're being gaslit. I mean, it's all sorts of things. And we're often told that this is it's just normal. This is natural, and you just have to suck it up and deal with it. And quite frankly, we live in a time where we have gotten so far, as far as advances in medicine and science, that we should be offering people, anybody, who wants more care to deal with, whatever symptom it is that they're experiencing to improve the quality of life. Like it should be a no brainer. And we should be having these conversations with everybody.
All right. So there's so many different places that I want to go here. I guess we're just going to have to take one at a time. Katie, you have hit some major, major hot buttons. It's interesting. I had some blood work done 4 years ago. Cause same thing. I was just curious, what's going on inside? I can't see inside, right? I only know the manifestation of maybe how I'm responding or how my energy is or how those kinds of things. And in that appointment, that doctor saw something in a thyroid antigen, labeled me with a autoimmune disease, and wrote me a prescription. I had never met him before, but within an hour, I was leaving with a diagnosis and a medication.
Mhm.
And something in me said, I don't know that I'm going to receive this. Like, I don't know that this is the path that I want to go down right away. And I did. I made some lifestyle changes that I thought would at least give me an idea. 4 years later, Katie, I went back to do the blood work, and none of those levels were off. So
Yeah.
imagine I would have been on this medication for 4 years had I just been, I guess, a robot, right? Or followed, or the doctor knows best. That's kind of a scary thought.
Yeah. And I think that it's one really important that we're advocating for ourselves and our health. And I am a huge proponent of that. Two, it's vital that we're talking about big picture and really informing our patients of all the options. And I think that's the thing that we struggle with probably most some of the times. I mean, it's I can't say that it's necessarily always the provider's fault. I think sometimes it's lack of education, lack of knowledge, and a lot of times it is the system, the way that it's set up, right? And having lack of time to sit down and have these conversations. And so, part of what I do with my patients is schedule these longer visits so that we can dig in deeper and have this time to have, let's talk about your stress. Let's talk about your sleep. Let's talk about what you're putting in your body and how you're moving. Because those play such an important role in every body system that, if we're not taking the time to address those things, a medicine's great and it's needed in some, in plenty of cases, right? Like, and I would never ever say that, but it is really important that we're not just throwing the medicine without the other piece, or at least taking the time to talk with the patient to find, because it is shared decision making, right? Like, it really should be a conversation and a team approach.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I am a big proponent of all the things that you just talked about. That sometimes the medication is the exact right fit, sometimes, but it really needs to get deeper and have that
Mhm.
conversation. So, I think what I want to do is I want to come back towards the end and talk about those different parts of lifestyle medicine that people can take away no matter what. But for the moment, I really wanted you to take a few minutes and talk us through what's going on when a woman is either going to experience perimenopause, is in perimenopause, because this is a time management podcast. However, we've said from the beginning, time management is energy management and emotional management. What are some of the things that are happening to women during this season, short or long, of their life? They've got maybe little kids or they've got teenagers. They maybe have a job. They've got all these that they've been able to manage in some sort. And now their body is like, I don't know. What's their body doing? So tell us some of the things that are going on that can be affecting us that
Yeah.
you have seen either in yourself or in your patients that we can just be like, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes think it's really relatable, and quite often I do when we share our personal stories. And so I'll kind of start there, because it really wasn't plain as day to me when I started, or when I first started having symptoms of what now I can reflect back on is clearly perimenopause. But I was probably 39 when my period started to change a little bit, and it was my provider said, "Oh, it's a new decade." And every decade, your periods start to change. And I thought to myself, well, that makes some sense, I guess. Like, in your 20s, they're depending on what you're doing, if you're on a birth control or not, or maybe it's more regular. In my 30s, I was having babies, I was breastfeeding, and then had an IUD, right? And so things were not what typical, right? And so you start to approach 40, and that made sense. I said, okay, I don't know what they've been like for the last decade, so fine. It really wasn't until I, started experiencing more anxiety, more mood swings, more, changes in my sleep, my energy level, that I really started to kind of hone in on some of this. And I will say that when the pandemic started is probably when a lot of this started to change for me. But I think, like many of us, the stress from the pandemic and all the world that was going on around us, really, it was that was an easy blame, right? It was easy to put it there, and I was thinking this morning to myself too, many of us, when we start to reach this stage, I mean, we're starting to enter new seasons of life, right? And so whether you're a parent and have kids or you don't, maybe it's something's changing in your relationships, maybe something's changing in your professional life. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And so our stress levels start to change because the seasons are changing. Maybe the busyness is changing. And so it is really easy to dismiss a lot of those symptoms up front, if it's sleep or if it's fatigue or whatever it might be. But I will say that it really wasn't until I had a pretty intense episode of rage. And if you've had perimenopause rage, or then I thought to myself, this is it. Like, why I didn't recognize this earlier is kind of beyond me. But that, coupled with weight gain, despite doing all the same things that I'd always been doing, it just felt like, wow, this is it. This is what it is. But it's those fluctuating hormones, because as we start to enter perimenopause, our estrogen levels aren't stable, right? Our progesterone levels aren't, really stable either anymore. What we see is the serotonin in our brain start dipping. And so there are lots of things that are changing in our body that we don't really know. Because those hormones are changing, other things are changing. So we might be becoming more insulin resistant, right? And so things that we were eating before, our body isn't processing the same way. Our blood pressure might start to go up, and we don't really know why. Maybe it's weight, or maybe it's lifestyle, maybe it's stress, but maybe it's because our hormones are changing. I talked to a lot of people about, watching their cholesterol go up. It's the same kind of, things, right? Things that we know that women suffer from probably at higher rates as we get older. Once we have reached menopause, our risk for heart disease, our risk for stroke, our risk for diabetes, all of those things go up. And it is often really because we have lost a lot of those hormones along the way. So, and it's interesting. I think that a lot of people want to focus on hot flashes and night sweats. And that is a classic, perimenopausal, menopausal symptom, right? But we often forget about, I think there's like 40 to 60 or something. I'd have to go back and look. Different kinds of symptoms that happen, changes that happen in your body when you are going through those hormonal changes. And sometimes it's, our path looks very classic, and then there's other times that it just doesn't look classic. And some people have everything, and some people have nothing. And there's really no great way to know like what you're going to experience. But what I will say is it usually is the fluctuating hormones throughout that time that's impacting us the most. And so if we can find a way to find a way to pivot in our life and to manage our behaviors and manage our lifestyle, because that really truly is one of the first places that we start, we can hone in and start to feel better, really, and be able to show up for our lives better than we were before. But yeah.
Wow, it's tough being a woman, Katie. Isn't it?
Easy. It is.
Those guys have it easy. I mean, they go through their own stuff. But,
Yeah.
I wrote down words like gaslit. I wrote down things like blaming other things. I remember a doctor at one point literally patting me on my knee, like dismissing me, even though this was a different season of my life, but with my own female issues going on. And I don't know whether it's outside influences or we can be, I don't mean this in a bad way, we can be martyrs. Like we do tend to put everything else before us and
Mhm.
just think, well, maybe this is just how I am today, or I'm really mad. Or I have to say, some of my friends that have experienced this, they do talk about that rage. And
Yeah.
they say, I am biting people's, like, what is wrong with me? So what is that about, Katie? Just for anybody that's like, man, that is me. And I have felt, or maybe they felt shame or they felt like they're going crazy. I've heard that too. Like,
Mhm.
I am going crazy. What is
Yeah.
that about?
Yeah, well, it is, and I think a lot of these swings are so intense sometimes, and they come out of nowhere often, and then it's done, and you sit and go and you look around, and whoever you decided to lash out at that day, and you're probably apologizing sometime down the road, right? But it is like, where did that come from? How did something what felt like so simple provoke me to do that? Am I crazy? Like, because the world around me hasn't necessarily changed, but I'm changing, right? And so it does. It sometimes feels like something's wrong with us, but those hormones are affecting our brain too. And you know, the rage is often attributed to the estrogen. And so we talk a lot about what's happening in our bodies, and if our estrogen is peaking and it's really, really high or intense, and again, I'll say it again, it is hard to know exactly what your body's doing in the midst of perimenopause, because it is like, it's this. It's not the same up and down even flow that it was in your 20s and maybe early 30s, but it is all over. And so that's why I think that rage hits so hard, because it comes out of nowhere. But it is, so estrogen gets really high, we lash out and we get angry, and then it probably tapers back down again, right? And so oftentimes for women, when we're talking about hormones, or if we're talking about, if lifestyle stuff isn't enough, or maybe supplementation isn't enough, oral progesterone can be really, really helpful during that time, because it really kind of helps to balance out that estrogen, as it clings to those receptors that the estrogen wants. And instead we're snatching it with progesterone, and calming. It's more calming, and it helps us sleep, and generally makes us happier. But yeah, it is a wild time. And I think because there's so many estrogen receptors all over our body, and that's the other thing we're learning about women. I mean, I'll be really frank, there's not enough research. There is some research for women, right? But if you look at the amount of research that we have compared to the amount of research that have been done on men or other things, it's not enough. And so part of the gaslighting and part of the dismissing and all of that comes from this. There's just not enough data, and people like data. Those of us that work in medicine or work in healthcare really, really like data. And studies are really, really important, because that helps guide and direct our care. And when there's not enough of it, it sometimes puts us in a place where we don't know where to go or what to do next. And we don't want to hurt anybody, because obviously that's the last thing. But I think that sometimes that's where the gaslighting comes from, that, and then the lack of education, quite frankly. I mean, it's not something that I learned in school. And I think if you talk to providers out there, and many of them haven't been taught this in school, or got a really, really short snippet on it. And so when you don't have the education or the data, and things don't look clear, right? Like, there could be other things going on in your body, and other things that might be easier to fix, right? If you're diabetic, or your blood pressure's high, or your cholesterol's high, or it's easier to give you an SSRI for your mood, your anxiety, or depression. I mean, those can feel like easier fixes, right? Or an easier way to put a band-aid on something without really digging in to find out why. Yeah, it's
Wow,
wild.
this is why we're having this conversation, right? I hope thousands and thousands, I hope this gets shared everywhere. I hope literally every best friend shares it with their best friend, or maybe a mom who is older and has a daughter in this age range hears this and says, "You know what? This was definitely a taboo topic, but I want my
Mhm.
daughter to understand what she's going through." I want this to get out there, Katie, because I'm already feeling reassured. Even though we haven't even talked quite yet, we're going to talk about the lifestyle medicine ideas, and we're going to get everybody at least in a direction. And of course, we're going to tell everybody how they can continue to follow you and find you. But it's already giving hope and awareness, which I think are two really powerful weapons for women. And again, this is the type of situation where maybe last year or last few years, managing your schedule, it wasn't always easy, but you could do it. Or it wasn't and now we're at a stage where we've got to have some extra attention to some areas in our life
Mhm.
that we have to prioritize. And you
Yeah.
gave us the start of a list. You gave us some behavioral changes, and you can tell us more what you mean about that. What we're putting in our bodies, our stress management, our sleep, that is such a huge one, and these risky behaviors that sometimes we use to fill in the gap because we're feeling
Mhm.
a certain way and we want an immediate fix, right? So
Mhm.
let's say that I'm your patient. I'm coming in. I'm like, "Okay, these are some of the things I'm feeling. Am I crazy?" You say, "No, you're not crazy. You're going through some hormones." How would you walk through some of these things to support women in having some holistic ideas on how they could manage this?
Sure. I mean, the most important part of any visit, I mean, whether it's this kind of a visit or, I mean, anything that I do, is really taking your history and taking that time to listen to that patient is really the most important thing. Because if we aren't doing that, we're missing the ball, right? And we're missing the whole point. Because so often that is the place that I hear from patients that we're missing out, right? Like, I tried to have this conversation, I tried to say these things. I didn't feel like I was heard. The response was, in such a way that, like, I just didn't feel like they actually got it. And so it's really taking that time to get the history first. And then really depending on what the issue is. So, right. So, like, what are the actual symptoms that you're experiencing? What do you want to prioritize? And then based on the information that I hear, we kind of discuss, you know, how to make changes or how to kind of direct care, I guess maybe is the best way to describe it. And so it's very customized, it's very personalized based on that person and what they're going through, and then really kind of how, like, what their goals are, really. And that's really what it should be, because this is not cookie cutter. Even this kind of care is going to be different for everybody, because the reality is all of our bodies are different. The lives that we live are different. Our stressors are different. Everything about us is different, and so we can't just assume that this what's working for somebody is going to work for somebody else. And so it's really kind of taking that time to listen. I was going to say something when we were talking about you know, the um, the not being heard piece, and now I feel like I lost it, because that is a perimenopausal thing too. That
At least we get to blame it on something.
it
That's
is.
the good news.
I know what it was. It's true. At least now I have a blame, right? Every single time I lose my train of thought, it's not my kids anymore. It's my perimenopausal brain. But I know what I was going to say was kind of going back to having these conversations and just talking about it, because I think what you're seeing now is definitely going to, it is a shift. The needle is moving in a different direction, because for the first time, you're seeing women talk about this in a whole different way. And women who, didn't know how to approach it, didn't know who to talk to, didn't know what to say, thought they were crazy, were ashamed to talk about it, whatever it might be. Maybe they asked their primary care, maybe they asked their GYN, somebody, right? And were dismissed. And so they kept to themselves. But what's happening is you're starting to hear more people be open about it. You'll see it on social media, you'll see it in your communities around you. The people just, it's not so taboo anymore, which I'm so grateful for. Whether you're talking about periods, whether you're talking about perimenopause, I mean, whatever it might be. And so I think what you're going to see hopefully now is more education, because, like you said, when we were growing up, we didn't talk about it. And we didn't really talk about our periods. We didn't talk about those things that were changing in our bodies. And I think it's so important for any female to be having these conversations, to know, because we should really know what's going on with our bodies.
Well, I'm excited for the next generation. I feel like maybe we're opening the door. Like
Mhm.
our generation, Katie, we're opening the door. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and without embarrassing her or revealing too much about her, because she's a 13-year-old girl, she is so open about everything. Like, I have to have a poker face at all times because I never know what she's gonna say, and I'm glad. I'm glad that she, and I'm sure her friends, and this is not gonna be something that they hide, and if we
Mhm.
have to be the ones to just bust that door open, shine a light, like, let's go, that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. My 10-year-old
Okay.
is very similar.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she's just progressing
Just
even
wait.
more.
Just wait, it gets better and better. Okay, and it really does, it really does. So, Katie, let's say that somebody doesn't have access to you, or they're just going to start on their journey. They're like, all right, this is something I want to look into. Is there anything across the board that they can start to put into their life, their schedule, their routine, their self-care that is really going to be a step in the right direction, no
Yeah,
matter what.
mhm. I mean, there's several different things, and I think one thing that I have to say all the time to everybody is that sleep is probably one of the most important pieces of this whole puzzle. And our sleep is constantly disrupted during this time of our life because of the changes happening in our body. And so some of it's out of our control, right? Because of what's happening to us, but some of it is in our control. And so getting a good 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep. I mean, it has to be quality. I'm not talking about this up and down business that I laid down at, whatever, 10 o'clock and woke up at whatever. But if you're not getting the quality sleep and the restful sleep, our brain is not allowed that time to rest and to regenerate our muscles, our body. I mean, all those things. And so I have started to tell people if we can solve sleep, we can probably solve a lot of your problems. Now, again, I'm not saying it's an easy thing. For many of us, it's not. But getting that sleep is really one of the first places that I start with people now. It didn't used to be. I used to start having conversations about movement and nutrition, and they are absolutely important too. And I'll absolutely talk about that. But I've tried to start focusing on sleep first because I just really feel like that is what impacts all the other things. Because think about it. If we're not getting the sleep, do we have the energy to move our body? Right? If we are not getting the sleep, are we making good food choices? Probably not. We're maybe having the caffeine that we know is going to trigger some hot flashes or make us feel more anxious. Or maybe we're having the beverage to help us wind down at night because we got so anxious. I mean, there's all sorts of pieces there. And it's harder to manage our stress when we're not sleeping too, right? And so if you think about kind of it's not the circle of life, but a little bit of the circle of life, I mean, sleep really is a huge piece. So that is the very first thing that I always tell people.
Easy, not easy, right?
It's not
And
easy. Yeah.
I'm glad you're totally affirming me and this podcast without realizing it. Probably one of our most interactive and important episodes that we've had in like 60 episodes was the one on sleep. I didn't even intend for it, Katie, but we were talking about evening routines. And I thought, what do we all have in common? Because some people had newborns and some people had, evening routine looks different. Wait, we all sleep. And we collectively did a sleep study, and it was a huge aha for so many of us. And reading Ariana Huffington's piece, she is a sleep missionary now. Like, she is pounding the pavement, of Huffington Post about that. She almost died because she was thinking that it was a badge of honor to burn the candle at both ends. And it's just not.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. It's always, always a good reminder of the value of sleep. So,
Yeah.
all right. Anything else that if you were just peeking into the heart, mind, soul schedule of this woman right in this phase of life, what's the one thing that we haven't said yet or that you want to re-say that we want to speak to her? You said we want women to be seen, heard, and valued. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for sure that I'll just kind of hone in back to the kind of the basic things outside of sleep is giving yourself permission to say no to things, to set those boundaries in your life. And I realize that that is very difficult depending on what season of life you're in and depending on what you have going on. But it is really, really important during this time to take time for yourself, to quiet, to calm the cortisol, right? To make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And so managing our stress, and part of that is the saying no and setting boundaries is really, really important. If there was two other things I would say that I would really want you to take away would be one, how you eat matters and what you put in your body matters. And so really it doesn't have to be this big fancy special thing, but if all you took away from today about nutrition was that to eat more plants, whether that's fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, plant-based proteins, whatever it might be, that would be the one thing, because fiber and those polyphenols are really going to be what's most important for our gut health, which is really it's kind of the home base when we talk about our hormones. So focusing on plants and not getting down on yourself on the days that maybe they don't go so well, and just saying, hey, you know what, didn't have a great day. Grace and compassion are important. I'm going to do better tomorrow. because really the reality is some days that just doesn't work even for me, right? We are redoing the floors in my house this week, starting tomorrow. And so it has been a madness, like just madness around here. So we're doing our best with what we have. And
Sometimes
then
you gotta have the piece of chocolate, Katie. You
yeah,
just
you do.
gotta
Sometimes you
have
just do.
a piece of chocolate.
And then the last thing I would say would be movement of any kind. And I don't, walking is amazing. And if that's all that you can do is get outside for a 10-minute walk, then do that. Because connecting with nature, connecting with the ground, and moving your body is one of the best ways to relieve stress. But it's also one of the best ways to help manage your blood sugars, improve your mood, and really kind of help to balance those hormones. That being said, I will never, ever go through a conversation without a woman without stressing the importance of strength training too. And again, that looks different for everybody. It might look like body weight. It might look like lifting heavy weights, but we're starting to reach a point in our life where we're losing muscle mass and bone mass, and we have to maintain that if we want to be living and doing all the things that we want to do, whatever that looks like, for you. So those are really my big takeaways when I'm talking to people about women's health, perimenopause, menopause, kind of this whole journey. As it is kind of back to basics, not easy stuff, but back to basic kinds of things.
Well, those were 3 really valuable tips for just like the baby steps, right? The getting started, the moving in the right direction. Obviously, also, we're going to suggest that you find a great medical professional like you who will listen to you, who will see what's going on with your hormones, who will help mitigate some of that as well. And so, Katie, I know that sadly you cannot be our NP for all of us. You're in Minnesota, but if somebody wants to connect more with you and like follow your blog and your social, we're going to put that in the show notes, but go ahead and just say it for those that are listening and want to know how they can just see more about you and what you're about.
Sure. So I have my business page. My business is Empowered Mind and Body, and you can find me on Instagram. And you can also find that page on Facebook. My website is empoweredmindandbody.net, and so you can find me there. I do have a blog post on my website as well. So even if I can't see you, if I'm in Minnesota, so I'm only licensed to treat people that are in Minnesota. But if even if you need some, information, you can sign up to be on my email list and through my website as well. And there's all sorts of great ways to get in touch and kind of follow the things that I'm doing.
So you
And
can
I'm
kind
also
of
on
be like,
TikTok. I forgot about that.
oh,
I'm kind of new to TikTok.
I get it. I totally get it. You can be like our NP big sister. We can just follow
Sure.
you if we can't come see you clinically. So Katie, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've got so many notes. I've got some good steps. I do feel seen, heard, and valued. I know the women on here do too. So I have a gift for you. It's a pretend gift. I give it to all my guests, and especially as you're getting these floors redone, and I'm like, sure that you could just use a bonus hour. So if I gifted you an extra hour that didn't come out of work or even play or family time, whatever, what would you do with your extra hour?
I mean, there's probably a lot of things I would do, but I will tell you one thing that I don't do enough of that I treasure is getting a really good massage. So that's probably what I would do as often as I could.
Oh, that's a good I haven't had that one yet. That's because that's
I had
1 hour. Although
It's 1 hour, yeah.
you kinda need the 90-minute one sometimes, don't you? Like,
You do.
just when you're getting
You do. But I had
Well,
a really good one last week, and so I thought, that was probably the right answer because that felt really
there you go. Especially, again, after those floors, I know how disruptive that can be.
yeah.
So after that and, of course, my follow-up to that question is, I hope that you find an hour where you can do that. And so, girl, when you're walking into that massage room, just take a little snapshot of the massage table, send it to me, and I'll know that you took advantage of your bonus hour.
Done. Done.
I love it. Well, thank you, Katie, for being on here today, for being so resourceful and also just real, and for walking the walk with all these women. And we're opening doors and paving the way. I just really appreciate your valuable insight and your expertise today.
Oh gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the invite. This is great. And this is one of my favorite conversations to have. So pick my brain anytime.
I love it. Well, I think the conversations are going to be flowing from here. So thank you guys for listening today. We'll see you on our next episode. God bless. Thank you for joining me on the TikTok podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and leave a 5-star review. Your feedback fuels our mission to help you master your time. Set your alarm for our next episode, and until then, make every moment count.